University, who has called elections for the last 30 years. So, right, he has his own way of doing it. He doesn't look at polls. He has a set of keys, that's what he calls them, basic questions. And the final key was set in last week, a week and a half ago, where he came out and said, Trump's gonna win because you have an independent candidate that's garnering 5% of the vote. And that's all you need for his keys. And again, all the professionals thought they were crazy. They were like, there's no way. I think what you saw from everybody, and when I say everybody, all the pundits, I think our own friends who, whether they were on the Trump side or on the Clinton side, you saw them that everybody thought Secretary of State Clinton already had won. In fact, if you started Tuesday out, and if anyone turned on your Facebook or your Twitter accounts or anything else, you thought it's over. But at the end of the day, we saw it progress and we saw what happened. So for me and this is, how did it work out? Now, a few hours later, or a few days later, what can we look back and say and learn from this election cycle? Well, first is the Electoral College works. And the way 200 years ago it was designed was 207 electoral votes get you the presidency. And it's, in an elementary form of way, it's very simple. If the 150th city in the nation with a population of 100,000, we don't want their vote to count more than the Dallas Citizens vote. And that's how basically it started. They wanted to make sure that that city of Dallas vote counted as much as Podunk, Ohio vote. They wanted to make sure LA counted as much as some town in Florida. And that's how it started. And as of yesterday, and you always hear every election cycle you will win debate on the electoral vote. Every election cycle. But if we just calm down and look, the last 200 years have proven that it works well. We may not like the outcome of it, but it works well. So as of November 9th, Donald Trump had accumulated 279. If you look at the battleground states that are still not accounted for in this thing, that they're still doing recounts because so close, he had the lead in all of them, which means that it is highly likely that he will get as close to 300 electoral votes, if not surpass it. So think about that. And why was he so successful? We went back and looked at it, and Mr. Trump surpassed 270 because he won what Obama had won in 08 and 012, which is Florida, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin. That's 83 electoral college votes. That is hard. That is hard. And the recent graph that I got to see this morning, which we already have sent this out, but if you look at Democratic turnout from the first 08, then you look at it at 2012, and you look at it now, what happened? Democratic turnout was the lowest. It went down. So at the end of the day, when you look at what caused this election, who won it for turnout, it's a very simple model. Republicans came out, where in 2012 Republicans lost because they didn't come out for Romney. It is over 2 million Republicans stayed home in 2012. Well, now you have the reverse. This election cycle, close to 2 million Democrats stayed home from compared. So when you look at that, yes, there was a surge of voters. Yes, there's a lot of anger, but it goes back to basic math. Did your supporters come out, or did your opponent's supporters come out? And it really boils down to that. The other graph that was distributed today also was, if you look at where the majority of the vote that came out, where it was very animated, and you look at the free trade zones, and everybody has benefit for free trade, and everybody that has lost jobs. You see a whole large swath of middle America, lower middle class, maybe entering middle class, that are angry at the system because they're the ones that have lost a lot of jobs. So it was the perfect storm. I think that people are tired of the system, but I think people have been tired of the system for a long time now, and we just saw what happened on elections.
So one caveat to what Neff just said is there was a third person that constantly predicted that Donald Trump would win, and that was Donald Trump. So if we look at the battleground states, and these are states that of course are in play every election cycle, and that's essentially all we watch for on election night, the extent y'all watch the returns. Trump there were 114 electoral votes that Donald Trump pulled from. And as Neff said, we see a lot of the Rust Belt states there, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan. These are folks that really have lost jobs, or at least felt the negative effects of free trade, as opposed to a state like Texas that's definitely felt some of the positive effects of it in terms of all the jobs and the shipping coming through here. One thing that I thought was interesting is, for one, both President-elect Trump and Secretary Clinton now hail from New York, which Clinton won handily by 11 points. But I looked, and Secretary Clinton, you know, they used to be from Arkansas, and Trump almost doubled her vote total there. That doesn't mean anything. I just thought that was interesting to see. When you look, bringing this down to Texas, President-elect Trump got 52.5% of the vote and 4.67 million votes. Secretary Clinton, 43.3% of the vote, 3.8 million votes. So he won very handily here in Texas. But if you look at other races, you can see how we compared on a relative level. So Wayne Christian was running for a railroad commission. That was the highest non-judicial executive office in the state, the executive office on the ballot in the state of Texas this cycle. Mr. Christian, who didn't spend money really his campaign, I would venture to guess that probably half of y'all didn't know that he was running, maybe until you got to the election booth. He got 53%, Grady Yarborough got 38%. You'll see Christian's vote total slightly lower than Donald Trump's, and of course Mr. Yarborough's slightly lower than Secretary Clinton. But here's where I think it gets interesting. Generally speaking, Supreme Court races, now I am a lobbyist and I follow politics and I have a campaign finance practice, so I should know all this stuff. I didn't know who was on the ballot for Texas Supreme Court until I actually went to go vote. This is not a race that I'm keyed into. These aren't races that you really get advertising for. I'm on Facebook, so I guess I wouldn't see the advertising they do. Generally speaking, when you're looking at a judicial election, barring the unusual, this is generic Republican versus generic Democrat. And if you look at these numbers, they pretty much bear that out. Justice Lerman, Green, and Guzman all got between 54.5 and almost 56% of the vote. And their opponents all got kind of in that same range. So a couple things I'd point out on that. One, each one of those Supreme Court candidates got a higher percentage of the votes cast than did President-elect Trump. And two, each one of those candidates got a higher vote total than did President-elect Trump. So that means that a generic Republican on a statewide basis performed better than did the President-elect of the United States in Texas, which is supposedly a strong red state. What does that mean? You know, you've heard pundits talk about it a lot. Neff and I have argued about this for the last 48 hours. I think there are 100 different reasons why people either didn't vote in that race and then voted Republican down ballot if they're Republicans, or voted for Secretary Clinton and didn't vote for anything else. It's hard to say, except that the president-elect is going to be less popular in Texas than are the general Republicans. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out, if it matters at all. It may be that in 6 months it doesn't matter at all, because he'll be insanely popular or very, very unpopular. It's just hard to say. So in conclusion, we do see increase in turnover. So we do have turnover in the legislature. The big counties in Texas, we saw Harris County swing entirely Democrat. Dallas County is obviously a Democratic county. The other large counties we've seen go more Democratic. But by and large, it still continues to be a Republican state. I think it's borne out by those Supreme Court totals, even though those candidates, Republicans, were getting 54.5%, 55%. The Democrats are still at the 40% or below mark. So it's still, we still have a ways to go for the state to turn truly purple, but it does seem to be on that trajectory.
And I will say, from the impact we don't know Donald Trump's agenda, President-elect. We do not know what he's going to start off with another 100 days. That's a transition team. So, I mean, there's always a debate whether he believes what he says. But there's going to be a lot of pressure to deliver his message. There's going to be a lot of pressure by those that got him elected, because you dance with those that brought you to the dance. But at the end of the day, when I look at his agenda and how it impacts Texas elections, how it impacts who's going to represent you in the next decade. What we saw what Trump did was South Texas, the Rio Grande Valley, their elections are primary elections. Once you get elected in the primary, there's no reason to spend money in campaign in the general election. If you saw the turnout, it almost doubled on the general election, where before it's like people just don't care about generals because they know who's going to represent them. And in fact, down in South Texas, Republicans vote in a Democratic primary because they want to have a say-so. And because it's Democratic county, that's just the way it's set up there. So you look at that, then you look at Harris County. For the last decade, the politicians, the political operatives, the database guys have always said the the emergence of the Democratic Party will come out of Harris County just because of sheer population. Harris County is bigger than 25 states. I mean, just to give you the way the electoral works in Texas, Harris County is bigger than 25 states in the nation. I mean, their votes, the populations, it's just amazing the size, the magnitude. So what did we see this election cycle? What did Trump was able to do? It increased Hispanic turnout in numbers that we haven't seen before. You're gonna see, oh, it's 15% only, 16% only, it's the same as last time. But if you look at the sheer numbers of vote that 16% now equate to, it is amazing. They came out and voted and turned a county that's red, or should be red, they turn it blue. Whether they can keep it blue is, we'll find out in 2 years when there's a governor election. So I look at that, and the biggest thing that I'm looking forward to watching is, I called it like six months ago, I said, is Donald Trump going to be to Texas what Pete Wilson was to California? California used to be a solid red state. They never had issues. Republicans controlled everything. Pete Wilson ran on a populist agenda. He did exactly at a smaller scale, just California, the same model that Trump just replicated. So we look at what happened after Pete Wilson. He was all about immigration. It was all about hard love and support everybody back, about building walls in San Diego. They passed Proposition 187. It was very contentious, but it forced what I call the business of commerce Republicans to take a side at that point. It was a business decision for them. And you saw the business of commerce Republicans shift over slightly enough to the Democrats to give them the vote, And now the last, how long has, since the 90s, California has been a solid blue state. And that's what it's yet to see. If he goes that area, it is, in my opinion, that we're gonna start seeing Texas trend that way, because the difference between Texas and let's just say Ohio or Wisconsin is, in Texas we have kids that go with kids, and we're so diverse. You have friends that are Hispanic, you have family members, you have all this, it's so diverse that the politics is now different in Texas. And while the majority, and if you look at polling, majority are business conservative, even on the those that classify themselves as Democrats, they're business conservative Democrats, you're gonna start seeing a shift, depends on how that rhetoric is managed.
I'm Buddy Jones, and I'm with HillCo Partners. This is my colleague Clint Smith. We're gonna be a lot quicker in our presentation to you, even though we're running out of time. But I can't start without telling you what a joy and a privilege it has been to represent this group before the various entities of Texas government. It's a great privilege. So thank you for your trust and your faith and your confidence in us. I see a lot of good friends around the table like Jerry and others, and I do just Josh and all, so thank you. Number two, if I only had one word to say to John Whitmire's exhortations, it would be what we would say when my daddy was pastor of the Shiloh Terrace Baptist Church in East Dallas. It would be amen. If you guys can somehow craft something that is a beginning of a project that we can take to the legislature to sell, it would be so helpful. I will add one little caveat. John's absolutely right in what he speaks of in the Senate, but there are two houses. And Clint and I have been working with the chairman and some members of the committee that deals with pensions in the House. And I think there's a little different take, Clint, and he's gonna talk a little bit more about that. So if we don't come up with something, I don't want us to throw up our hands and say we're not going forward. We'll just have to work through it, as John said. And so that means women and men around this table have really got to labor on your behalf. This is all gonna happen in an overlaid view of what's gonna happen during the session. What are the issues? Who are the players? What's their attitude toward each other? So I'm gonna quickly go down a list of some things. First of all, the Senate and House are as different as men and women. They come from different places. They have different priorities, and I think you'll see it manifested by the leadership of those two bodies. of all, the Senate will probably, as John said, come out with more social issues in the first 60, 70 days of the session. They'll deal with things like vouchers and transgender bathrooms and gun control and immigration and sanctuary cities and maybe some abortion legislation, voter ID. The House, not so much. The House will wanna come at it looking at redoing our school finance situation as to how we're gonna take care of these 85,000 new students that we have coming into Texas public schools in this last year. And so the House will pay more attention to things like that. They'll pay attention to the same thing y'all have been reading about. How are we gonna fund child protective services? What are we gonna do about these children in foster homes? And so you can kind of get an idea of the difference in the way the House is gonna operate in the Senate. And that overlays everything that we're gonna be dealing with. One thing I can tell you, after these social issues, the Senate is very serious about property tax reform. They're gonna call it reform or relief. And our city council members need to listen to this. They've identified the way to reform our property tax system in Texas. So Scott, here's what they wanna do. They wanna take the 8% increase that you're allowed now to run state and city government, which they keep giving you all kinds of mandates without paying for them. And they wanna roll that back to 4% and wanna have automatic elections instead of those that are done by signatures. And so that's their idea of property tax reform. So we may have a little different take on that, but my guess is the House will have a different take on it. But that's more of this tension you're gonna see between the House and the Senate. Budgets. The Senate is gonna wanna be lean and mean, and really kind of more mean than lean even. They just don't see the need for increased budgets in many of the areas that the House members do. And the House, on the other hand, will wanna take care of those in need and health care and public education and higher education. We're not gonna have a big surplus this year. Last time, we had a $8 or $9 billion surplus. This year, maybe 1 or 2, and maybe less than that. And so that'll make for bad moves in the House and Senate. Healthcare. What happens to, how are they gonna replace the Affordable Care Act that we keep hearing about? I don't know. And so that puts everything kind of in a question mark category. Are we gonna have Medicaid expansion? We're leaving a lot of money on the table by not doing that. Will the legislature move in a different direction? Our population growth has swelled by millions and millions over the last 5 years, which puts a strain on our water, on our electricity grid, and on our transportation infrastructure. You guys around the table, guys, it's a generic term, I'm sorry. Y'all know that. You can't get to your emergency calls for the traffic here in this area. And we really, hopefully, the Senate and the House will pay some attention to those major issues and the resources that it takes to deal with them. We've had some winners and losers last night, or Tuesday night. Those that supported Donald Trump will be find themselves in a probably an interesting position. Our lieutenant governor was the main one, and my guess is that will empower him even more than he is by the virtue of his job. Our agriculture commissioner, believe it or not, has been mentioned on 3 occasions by Donald Trump. Go figure. Our attorney general, my guess is he's very interested. He's going to be head of the Justice Department, and it'll be a different one than we have right now. And Rick Perry, Steve Munisteri, Mike McCall, the congressman from Austin. We anticipate all of those to have a little bit more of a say-so in what happens in Texas, and Clint's gonna quickly go through the pension issues, and, we'll open it up for questions for all of us. Is that okay?
We've been in contact almost daily with the House Pension Committee. You heard Senator Whitmire talk about that Senator Huffman's gonna carry the Houston legislation. And, it is basically our understanding that Chairman Flynn of the House Pensions Committee will carry, any legislation out of Dallas that comes up. I talked to, Chairman Flynn, late last week, and then talked to his chief of staff yesterday. And, the message I started getting is that you need to emphasize to your client and, the people they're working with, that we intend to fix this problem, have it fixed, and we would like for them to come to us with a solution. If there is not a solution brought to us, then we are going to sit down and look at all aspects of the situation, and we will write the solution. Now, I can argue with them, and I can say that this is a different situation than you've got in Houston, and it is, and I've explained that to them. But, the feeling is, the message I'm getting, and I don't think y'all are getting, any different, is that, it's a major problem that needs to be fixed. And, if y'all don't, your clients don't wanna do it, then, we're gonna fix it for you. And it's a pretty simple message. And, so anyway, we will keep working with them. I think that, Locke, and HillCo, we're gonna have a lot of work during the next session to try to work with the legislature on trying to come up with a, solution, that everybody can live with. And I think it's very complex, and the thing we have to keep reminding the legislators in Austin is, because it's a different situation in Houston, it's not, it can be a good federal approach. And that's kind of, y'all want to add anything to me?
Just to add with what Clint said, Chairman Flynn is an honorable man. His yes is a yes, and his no is a no, and it's, in this day and age, it's hard to come by, but he's always a straight shooter with us. We had lunch with him a few months ago, and he looked us in the eye and said, this is not a black and white issue. This is not some issue like sometimes the legislators get issues that it doesn't have any personal feelings, it's just a bill. He said, I have someone very dear to me, a relative is a firefighter. I have friends that are cops. So he said, so I'm not looking at this, and make sure your clients know, I'm not looking at this as just another bill. Because I know there's a lot of hurt, and there's a lot of promises that were made. He goes, I understand that, but it's something that we're all need to fix. And he goes, and it is a personal issue, because I have relatives that are under the circumstances. So when Clint tells you, when Buddy tells you, this is what the chairman said, in all our years of dealing with him, whether it's chairman or in other committees, he's a straight shooter, he's a normal man, and the last thing I want you to understand is, his yes is a yes, and his no is a no, and just take it with you.
Okay, any questions? I got one kind of off the subject. Is, Mr. Cruz's political career dead?
You mean Supreme Court Justice Cruz?
Never thought of that.
I think that, he certainly did not help himself. The thing that you're gonna have to watch is that, how much leash that, President Trump wants to give you. And, it'll be interesting to watch.
This is really for anybody that can answer it, and I don't expect you to speak for, a House Representative member, but Senator Whitmire was very adamant about his stance on local control. Do any of y'all have a impression on how the House of Representatives, specifically Chairman Flynn or the other committee, how they feel on local control? Because that's a big issue that we're battling back and forth right now with all the parties involved in our country.
I think personally, the conversation we had, to be fair, I have not specifically said, what do you think about local control? But, I do think that Chairman Flynn feels like the way the system works now, it is local control. Y'all come up with a solution and bring it to us, but one side should not be able to, have the ability to cram something down the other side's throat. And I'm very much paraphrasing from what I've heard him say, but, we had not examined that with him as much as, specifically as City of Whitmire said, and we'll be glad to do it.
I'm just speaking for myself, I'm not speaking by any other board, but I think that's our biggest issue when all our players is control. And I think that's why we are not on the same page. Anybody else have any opinion on how they think other politicians see local control?
I'll look at it from the conservative members. Local control is one of those, it's a buzzword, it sounds great. Everybody should support local control, but then, like the senator said, once you explain there's different versions of local control. And once you start explaining to the members, this is what you're doing, this is how it impacts. You're about to give a group of elected officials who are term limited, who come in and out every 2 years or every 4 years. Everybody has different circumstances. But I wouldn't say if you change their minds, they take a step back once you explain it. Because everybody throws local control out, but in your case, it's very different than what local control is for a different issue. So as long as we explain the process, I think people become more aware of what it actually means.
I think that you do.
This is another, throw-off question, I'm sorry, off topic, but how is the interpretation of local control from the state to the municipality different than their argument from local control from the federal to state?
So, that's a great question. I'll tell you, I've actually had this conversation with a couple members, conservative members, and, so what you hear a lot is that, the federalism argument, that states' rights, feds can't tell us what to do, and they turn around and they say, we tell cities what to do. And the reason they say that, their intellectual basis on it is, the federal government is a creation of states. Cities are a creation of states. Cities are statutory entities. Therefore, the state does have police power over what the cities do, while the federal government shouldn't be telling states what they should do. That is their general basis for it. That doesn't mean that they follow it in all circumstances, and certainly, as Neff was saying, local control for issue 1 could be completely different than local control for issue 2. But that is how a lot of these members rationalize it in their minds.
I was wondering,
It's a disingenuous argument.
it changes, let there be a disaster and it changes.
They scream about it when the federal government gets in their business, and yet they send you guys, all kinds of unfunded mandates all the time, and say, y'all pay for it here. And so it's disingenuous, but I think generally, you're not gonna see the legislature want to return a different set of control mechanism from the state to the locals. I really don't. So we hope we can put that behind us and then work on what it's gonna look like, from here.
I think it would be very hard, for legislation to pass this personal opinion that changed the current system that, you have. And, in the House legislature. And so, the next thing to take a look at is that, with the idea that, you'll have the status quo on the system, how can we, start moving towards solutions to get it fixed?
I like that idea.
Well, I had a question, I'm kind of new to the pension board in June, so I just wanna understand your relationships. Do two firms, how do you work together, or do we have contracts individually with you, and then are they, you're gonna cover some issues, somebody else can, at the city level, we have people that do water, and I think HillCo does our water, is that right?
We do your water issues.
And so two questions, and how's our contracts handled, and how do we work together? And I gotta understand the relationship with Senator Whitmire, is he a lobbyist, or does he just work at your firm and then lobby for it?
So, I can answer, second question is really easy. He's done counsel with our firm. He does not lobby at the state level. He does not do that. So
How do you have that law when he is, you know?
Yeah, we don't lobby him either. It's actually funny, he can tell you a story that there was a bill that came up and he started railing against it and they said, hey, this is the bill that your firm's pushing, and he said, I didn't know and I still don't care. So he is not involved in our lobby practice. He does not lobby on the state level, and we don't lobby him on the state level.
So you just bring them along here to get inside information from the legislative perspective. Okay. And then,
We have two separate contracts, and, but we both jointly and severally work on every issue that you all have together. We have a great working relationship, we, you know, sometimes we divide up what members we're gonna work. She'll work 10 members, and I'll work 7, and, you know, we'll do that, but we always are in lockstep on all of your issues. It's not like the city where we do water and somebody else does electricity.
because we're just,
Yes, so it's a totally different, setup.
okay, so I know, so you water, and then do we have the city, I'm trying to remember, because we have like several different, do we work for us? The city, not the.
Our team doesn't, I don't know if our firm does any legal work for the city, but we do not represent the city. Our firm does. That's
So-
legislation.
And then what if the city and the pension, you know, don't go into this together with the package, and when you're asked to lobby, you represent the city and you represent the pension, how's that gonna work?
Well, if there's a conflict, you guys are gonna you're gonna make us do what the law says, and that is deal with it and back out, of one or the other. But now, hopefully, we don't get a water issue with the.
So it would,
the
but so
pension fund.
you're saying in your firm, it would just be water?
A total
Like,
water.
if you would
We
represent
gotta-
the pension on the pension board or the pension with the city then, and for the pension, and if the city had a different position, you would be working against the city?
If a city has a different position, on a water bill that, the pension system
No,
has.
but I'm saying on the pension, you won't see that as a conflict.
If the city had a different position on pensions,
Right.
then we are engaged by the pension board and we would represent the pension board. And then we still, there has never been a conflict because it's been water only, on what we represent the city.
And you don't know if Locke does any lobbying for the city?
We don't lobby for the city of Dallas. I do not know if we do other legal work for the city.
But the question of a conflict is really not in our minds. It's in your mind and the pension mind. And, so y'all will make that call.
How do you convey your work product back to the board? Do verbal briefings like this, or is there summation papers, or memos, or letters, or?
Most of it is done orally by the phone, there are different, exchanges of information through emails and things like that. But, and then typically after the legislative session, we always come to the board and give an overview of what happened and so forth like that. But, just through the years, I would say all of us, both Locke and HillCo, probably talk to your pension board at a minimum once a month or twice a month, just on different things that, have come up.
What happens is, through the legislative session, both HillCo and Locke will track bills and communicate their views on it to us, usually staff. And then every month during the board meeting, during the legislative process, there's a bill summary that's produced, so you can see what the legislation that's out there that affects pensions. Some of it deals directly with pensions, sometimes it's something dealing with maybe an open meetings, open records, or things that tangentially affect pensions. And so that their communication, if they're not here directly talking to the board, is 2 sessions ago when the Truitt bill, was that 2 sessions ago? I guess it was 2 sessions ago, when that was a fairly contentious pension issue, but it wasn't just for Dallas, it affected all the systems statewide, and frankly, there was not agreement amongst the systems statewide as how to deal with that bill, but for the most part, we haven't had pension issues that Houston's had, and Austin, and some of the others where they've gone through the legislature to get changes, San Antonio. So we just sort of monitor these issues that affect pensions and report to the board and tell the board this is how we're treating it, this, that thing, and the board either says that's fine or they don't. So that's how the board gets kind of communicated.
And I'm new to, I apologize for that. The contracts themselves, does that set out the scope of work, or what the expectations are? Does that lay out what you're getting paid for?
Yes, that's right.
Is it a fixed amount, or is it, because this session, I mean, it's like, as you mentioned, Josh, in the past, we've been monitoring, this could be very active session, so is it fixed or is it hourly rate? It's a fixed amount, and I don't think the rates changed in many years.
We've never changed it. The only thing is that there used to be in our contract, there used to be an expense, component, and, it was absorbed into the contract, and that's the only change that we've had with y'all, I think, since we started the contract. I mean, there haven't been any delays, prices, or anything like that.
We've been doing this 20 years.
About 15. Yeah, about 15. I think we started in 2000.
And we started right when y'all did too.
2001, 2002.
Buddy, this is
Yes,
a question for y'all. We have a plan, and I think it's a great plan. I think the committee did a great job getting this plan before board. We tweaked it a little bit, and we like it. The problem that we have is we have to have an election. It has to be passed by 65% of the members that vote, and there are a certain segment of members that don't like this plan. And I'm guessing when we show this plan to the committee, they're gonna like it also. But if we don't get the votes, then what process do you think the pension committee would have from there? Tell us to go back to the drawing board, tell us, we like this, we want it implemented, we'll figure out what to do from here, or what, because the voting is a problem, and a lot of pension plans around the country don't have even their active members voting. And when we go to conferences, they ask us, how do you get anything passed? I said, well, in the past, we've only voted on benefits, and how are you gonna not get that passed? Benefit increases. So
I'll give you my personal opinion.
it's easy on getting that passed, but, we've got a problem. This is gonna be the worst vote we've ever had.
I'll give you my personal opinion from talking to Flynn, and, I've tried to mitigate it, but basically what I'm hearing from, his staff and from him is that, please convey that, y'all need to come up with a plan, because what we will write will be more draconian, for both sides, and I say both sides, the city and the, plan, than, what y'all, if you don't have a plan, if we write it, then what y'all can come up with. Now, I think that's political posturing, but I think the message they're trying to send is, give us something that we can, work with that has, fairly close agreement, and then we'll keep working with you to negotiate.
And when is there gonna be an election?
First Monday.
So we'll know in.
By Thanksgiving.
No, by the 28th.
Yeah. That afternoon.
And to follow up on that question, is Senator Whitmire, I asked him, pretty aloof, but he said it could be a multi-phase process. But, Mr. Flynn, Chairman Flynn's been a little bit more concise in his wording. Chairman Flynn said, you're not getting out of this legislative session without a fix. Which side of the house should I be listening to?
Well, the answer's both.
Well, I know that, but, I mean, will there be a will we know one way or the other by September, October of 17, or will we be hanging it out in a holding pattern until somebody's prepared to land this plane?
Well, the session will be over, at the end of May 31st, and, you'll know one way or the other, but I really think that there will be some solution out of the legislature.
We better act like there will be, because I think that's the case.
That's what I mean, that's the drum I'm beating. I just wanna make sure that I'm not misleading the membership into saying that there's something other than that in it. That's my belief, so I just wanna make sure that you talk to the guy.
Our members seem to think there's plan B and we have plenty of time, and we don't wanna convey the wrong idea that there is a little bit of a sense of urgency.
I think the Houston issue really puts more pressure on you than ordinarily, because they're gonna get their stuff done, I predict. And then they're gonna go, well, let's finish this pension issue. And we're gonna have a lot of extra pressure if we don't, so your membership is wrong if they think it's a lot to go forward in the future.
And it's something that will be.
So I said that was a lot. I know there's not many members here, but to think something better will come along, you mean that's not gonna happen?
No, sir.
Okay, I just wanna make sure I understood you correctly.
And I'll tell you, this thing as good or bad as Dan Flynn is, and we all love him up here, your chairman next time might not be Dan Flynn. And it may be somebody that's got a real stinger out, or a different one, it could be somebody like Josh, not this Josh, but Josh Gee.
Yeah, you gotta keep in mind that, defined contribution plan is still out there, and we're gonna find that during the session versus defined benefit.
We need to deal with it now.
Anybody else? Well, thank you for coming.
Thank you.
We're gonna catch a plane.
So we're gonna do one more thing before we go to lunch.